Welcome everyone to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. I hope you've enjoyed the last several interview shows as much as I did. But this week, since we're going into the last month of 2014, my goodness, where did the year go? I thought it would be interesting to do a card check on the main energies for December. The ones that we will be finishing off one solar year with, and will sort of lead us into the next one. With that in mind, let's take a look at the cards and runes coming up for December 2014 and see what may be in store for us. So I asked my usual question in this way. What are the most likely energies and or events coming up for the month December 2014 according to the cards and runes? Okay, the very first card we have that sets this reading off is the Warrior. This card is usually about conflicts, battles, defenses, military topics, and often war in an international or current events reading. It isn't always war in the conventional sense, though, like bombs and guns. It can also be about diplomacy, or simply some really high-level conflicts and disagreements. Being the first card in this reading, this card sort of sets the tone pretty much for everything that follows, and it's the key for the energy for this time period. I've talked about that before, how the first card often sort of gives us our set theme, and in this case it's the Warrior. So right off the bat, we know the next 4 or 5 weeks are likely to be lively, conflicted, and involve a lot of opposing energies. In a word, this is what I can call an active energy period, rather than a passive one. Those of you who follow the show know that I've mentioned before that there are time periods when the energies seem rather calm and unmoving. It doesn't mean that nothing at all is happening, but overall the energies are focused inward, reflective, often combined with a feeling of the general population you just want to hide out somewhere until things blow over. This is not one of those time periods. Okay, there may be so much going on that you may feel like hiding, although that isn't showing up in the cards. But I think a lot of people are going to discover that they may be, rather than withdrawing, they may be kind of trapped or stopped from acting on physical or emotional events that are happening in their lives. And I can say this because the next card is the Prison. Now, this is the card with the guy sitting in the sort of jail, and he's even turned his face away from the light. So not only is he actually a prisoner, but is accepting his role as prisoner and victim. And that will come up later on and echoed in another card, so I'm mentioning it now. But in general, the Prison card suggests that people, emotions, ideas, and perhaps even entire nations are being trapped or imprisoned by something. This card can also signal a period when the law, justice, courts, decisions, etc. play a larger role in sort of the scheme of things in the news, etc. than you'd normally expect. However, the two cards together provide a sort of warrior in prison or trapped by war and conflict that I really don't like much. Especially when I go back to that previous show I did with Psychic Focus Lady Lynn, where we did a reading on the Ukraine, and I got both the images of things getting stuck or bogged down there, but also the words winter war. I'm not certain, however, that these cards are just about the situation in the Ukraine and Russia, important as that is. In fact, I'm almost certain they're not totally about that. Rather, I think this is one area where the energy is going to express itself, but I also feel it's going to spill over into a lot of other areas. I feel a really strong pull toward the U.S. being trapped by conflict or unrest, and in prison may reflect both the political reality of human events, as well as continued bad weather in some places, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, which is going to cause people to feel like they're battling the elements and possibly even trapped in their homes. We're already seeing this towards the end of November, and I get a feeling this pattern is likely to continue. I think that some of this is going to sweep over into Europe as well, especially the weather events. But also politically, here in my home in Ireland, it suggests that conflicts over water charges will not have ended with this past week's announcement of the government changes on the subject. In other words, I don't see an easy or swift resolution. I also suspect that the weather actions are going to be occurring here to a degree. Again, probably the further north you are, the more likely you are to be impacted by this. And also in the southern hemisphere, there may be somewhat of a blowback on the warm side, but I'm not real sure on that. I'm not that connected to the Southern Hemisphere. I'd have to look at that separately, and honestly, I didn't get a chance this time. But basically, look for weather events that are kind of extreme, especially if you live in the northern latitudes. I also have a hunch that both the US and Europe may find themselves trapped or imprisoned by actions in the Middle East that affect them. And not only the whole thing with ISIS and ISIL, but other things as well. I think the situation in Israel is going to cause some problems, and Iran is also making an impression on my mind. So look for stories about both of them, not necessarily together, though they could be, but they just feel really like they're going to cause some issues. A lot of the energy I'm picking up, especially for the US, is more what you'd expect for spring or summer in terms of the political climate, though. Winter's usually a calmer time, but this feels like a time period when a lot of strong emotions are going to be flying about all over the place, with battles and conflicts hopefully taking the more democratic form, such as debate, rather than, say, serious street violence. I mean, again, you'd think it would be too cold for that, but I think that there may be still some issues flaring up. The prison card may indicate people going to prison as a result, or it is as part of this meme, or there may be just some prominent law cases and trials coming up that, as this is just sort of one of those nasty time periods when, you know, on the one hand you have the energy trying to break out and cause everyone to want to put on their armor and go forth and do battle, and yet they may be feeling trapped and prevented from doing so by the opposing energies. And when people get these kind of push-pull energy periods, make people restless. They make them unhappy, and they become actually in some ways easier to push over the edge, and when they finally do explode, it can be worse. So it's one of those, normally you would expect this time period not to be like this, other than the usual blow-ups from the holidays, but that's different. This feels more on a larger level than just, you know, wanting to get in an argument with Uncle Fred about about politics. This is much more serious than that. Now, the other reason I'm saying this is because the message card is right in the middle of the side card portion of this reading. And if you remember, the message card is a message in a bottle, and it sort of means, it just magnifies the cards on either side of it. Sort of, this is the message. This is the Star Trek message, Captain Kirk, which is not at all subtle if you remember the old original Star Trek series or have seen it in reruns. It sort of also adds more directional force to the reading as a whole. In other words, this is really something to listen to. What I mean by all this, though, is that the prison card becomes really deadly serious, like I mentioned before, and it's almost as heavily weighted in energy as the warrior card, even though the warrior card's starting off, because the message card magnifies it. And this card on the other side of the message card is fortune. Now, fortune is a card that shows a pilgrim holding a lantern going up the winding staircase to seek fortune and a treasure at the top of the stairs. By itself, it can be a really good card, especially in a private reading, often indicating the client is likely to come into a physical or spiritual inheritance. And sometimes it also, like if it's a young person, you may be getting a sense that they're going out to seek their fortune. In other words, that's a very positive reading for it. However, in a current events reading, especially one like this, you have to look a little beyond the idea of that sort of fortune, and more towards fortunes as in great wealth and money, or the banking system. There's also fortune as in the fortune of something in order to grasp the most likely meaning of this card here in this reading. Being next to the message card, and after the prison card, we once again, just like earlier in the month of November, still get this image of trapped money, or money in prison. If you go back and listen in the archives, you'll see this was also a very powerful meme in November. And as I said last time, I'm not enough of an economist to know the actual sort of econo-speak for this particular situation. I don't even know exactly what it means on the ground, but not only has whatever this stuck money or imprisoned money situation is, it's not only not improved since last month, if anything, it appears to be getting worse, and even a stronger force in the world situation. Even a bit more disconcerting is the suggestion that the warrior or his companions in conflicts and battles are likely to erupt over this trapped or sort of seized up money. Jail or prison may even await some of those involved, though I think that's more of a secondary issue here, unless some of what sparks public information and indignation on this situation is the result of some sort of court case, which given this sort of thing is always possible. So in other words, we have, a possible whistleblower or something goes off and suddenly people become aware of it. It also gives us a clue of where to look if seemingly pointless brush fires suddenly erupt into larger conflicts, either actual physical battles between countries and groups, or more likely symbolic ones like hostile corporate takeovers, diplomatic rounds between nations fighting over different power blocks, banking disasters or takeovers or collapses, that sort of thing. Things that just suddenly seem to come out of the blue, and you wonder, why is that happening? You want to use the old adage here, follow the money. Or in this case, perhaps, look for where the money is stuck or trapped. These could be clues as to what the actual problem is underlying what may otherwise seem a kind of pointless conflict. Interestingly enough, the last of the side cards of this reading is the libido. Now, this card in its simplest form is about our old friend sex. Sorry about that in the background. I have a couple of young cats in here, and they just knocked something over, but I'll worry about it later. So, getting back to the reading, the simplest form of this card, the libido, is about sex and fertility. But it's a lot more complicated than that. It's also about life force, distraction, and specifically, it is about being distracted by sex or the kind of other bright, shiny things we desire on almost a sexual or desirable level, and things that we may not be able to see a deadly danger that may be right under our feet. The picture on this card is of two gorgeous peacocks about to engage in a display fight over a peahen we can't see. There's a lovely waterfall, bright colored flowers, brilliantly green grass, glorious rust-colored autumn leaves all on this card. What the peacocks don't seem to notice, though, because they're so distracted both by sex, their environment, and the intended violence, sort of symbolic violence, but it's still battling they intend to engage in. They don't see the snake in the grass right beside them. Now, the snake might move on. He could strike and kill one or both of them at any time. So the good sides of this card are life force, beauty, the joys of physical reproduction and everything romance, everything that goes with that. But the bad side of this card is about getting so caught up in those distractions and pleasures that we endanger or destroy ourselves because we don't see something that should be relatively obvious. This last meaning is what I'm strongly feeling about this card for the next month in regards to current events. That the distractions of the holiday season are going to be used, or perhaps more exactly maybe attempted to be used, to keep people's minds and to distract them from the serious dangers posed by the conflicts, the warriors, prison, and especially all that trapped money or that frozen money. These are essentially the big issues. People will not constantly be having other issues thrown at them to sort of get their minds in other places. It won't be possible to truly distract from the serious stuff for very long. For some things, like people perhaps actually being physically trapped by the weather, as we've already seen this week, are simply going to be impossible to ignore, at least for the people most affected and anyone they know. And with social media, I know that this week, I've been getting Facebook posts from people I hardly know, but they're stuck, say, in Buffalo, New York, and they're showing pictures of, the 7 feet of snow blocking their door or whatever. It's impossible for the mass media to simply kill everything like this. So there will be some spillover. And I think it's going to be on other issues as well, but I think the weather is going to be the one that's going to be the most difficult for the media to ignore. Also, this card could indicate, the libido card again, further sex scandals coming to light, especially those of famous people, either as accusations or actual trials, arrests, prosecution. Again, we have that kind of law image. Well, any such charges are very serious and they should not be ignored. Again, I just get kind of this feeling that one reason they're going to be sort of hyped up or sexed up, as you will, as they say in the industry, in the run-up to New Year's this year is just sort of that distraction factor. On the plus side, for individuals, this is likely to be a somewhat sexy and lively time, too. It's a great period to snuggle up under the covers or in front of a roaring fire with your partner. It's a wonderful time to, if you're young and free and looking for fun, it's a good time for that. If you're trying to have children and you're a couple, this is even a more auspicious time period, for despite all the crazy and rather negative negative energies we have running around, we have both this libido card and the rune for birth of Rakano. I'm going to talk about more on the runes in a few moments, but that's a really good positive combination for the creation of children or the creation of ideas, that whole idea of mental as well as physical fertility and the starting of new things. It's going to be very good during this time period. And again, international events and people and leaders and nations can take advantage of this too. Whether they will or not remains to be seen, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. But again, I want to emphasize that while I'm at this reading seeming to be more on the negative stuff, it's because that's what I'm feeling towards more in current events, but that is not the only way to read these cards. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodypsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Okay, now I'm going to get back to the cards again. We sort of finished the side cards, but I want to look at the cards I pulled from the Cat's Eye Tarot deck. Usually I pull just 2 cards from this deck for a show, but this time I really felt pushed to pull 3. Having learned in the past not to ignore such little pushes, I did, and it turned out the 3rd card added a lot more to the reading. It was pretty important. Now, the 3 cards together are the Knight of Wands, the 10 of Wands, and the 10 of Swords. But I'm going to break those down a bit and not just leave this in tarot speak here. The Knight of Wands in the kitty deck is a charming and self-satisfied young orange tomcat. He's happily climbed up a tree and looks on the world with a smug expression. He does not need to be rescued, and is proud of what he is, what he's done, and what he hopes to become, just like the little tomcat climbing on my shoulder right now and tried to take my mouse. He's described as charming, superficial, self-confident, cocky, daring, adventurous, hot-tempered, full of passion, and sometimes even downright foolhardy. In a nutshell, he is an adolescent male, one almost at his full physical strength, but whose emotions are still mercurial and changeable, and his maturity level just isn't caught up with his physical growth. It isn't a bad thing, it's just the way human beings are. He's full of energy, but not always wisely directed, and in a relationship, he may need a more stable partner until he grows up a bit. Again, the image on the cards is cats, but I say people because we're primarily reading about human beings here. In a current events readings, given the other cards we've had so far, I would say this adds more volatility to both the warrior and the prison cards, because even a brief life observation will show most people that young men, and often young women as well, but particularly young men, were traditionally chosen to be trained as warriors because They were just like that young tomcat on the card, or the one that just tried to take my mouse off my computer. They're physically strong, full of energy and passion, but they're immature and unformed enough mentally to be more easily trained and led about by the right officers. The same ages are also when young men, and again, sometimes young women, are likely to join gangs, run riot, commit crimes, or simply trap themselves by making some really unwise choices. Choices that are based more on direct emotions than clear-headed thinking. If you're the parent of such a young person, or a young person yourself listening to the show, and by that I mean pretty much anyone, male or female, under the age of 25, this is not a good time period in December. Let me repeat, it is not a good time period in December to make a major life decision if you can avoid it. Especially anything monetary that would involve things like your fortune or your fortunes, like buying a sports car, or suddenly deciding out of the blue you want to change majors and take out a giant student loan. As you have to make this sort of decision, and sometimes life just forces it, it would be a really good idea to bounce your idea of quitting school and starting your own business with a more experienced, for example, business person. You don't have to listen to your parents, but do get with some experienced individual. It's very important right now. And even those of us who are no longer young physically need to pay attention to this energy, because it's the sort of energy flying around that it can easily entrap you into the temptation of feeling young again for a brief period by just wanting to jump into something on a whim. There are times when that energy is really wonderful and it's exactly what you want to do. Trust me, this holiday season is so not that time. You could really wind up in a world of hurt no matter what age you are. Be really careful of impulsive decisions. Now, the Ten of Wands, this is the sort of follow on to the Knight of Wands, amazingly, at least here in this reading. We have perhaps the same confident young tomcat. Let's call him Mr. Orange. Mr. Orange has had a lovely day climbing trees, and he also found himself a piece of live string to play with. This live string happened to be a snake. Now, my husband keeps pet snakes, the non-venomous kind, but he's told me that most of the time, when it's cat versus snake in the natural world, the cat will usually win. Unless the snake is like a giant python or something and big enough to eat the cat. This is true even when the snake is venomous like a rattler who might be able to kill the cat by biting them. Sometimes the snake gets lucky and does kill the cat, but most of the time the cat wins. And on this card, we see a picture of Mr. Orange, and he's won. He's got this huge dead snake between his teeth. It's almost as big as he is. He's trying to bring it home, probably to show his humans what a mighty hunter he is. He pauses at the bottom of the porch steps, mouth full of heavy snake, with an expression that says, "Gee, this seemed like a good idea at the time." This card is all about taking on more than you could chew, in the case of the cat quite literally, overextending yourself, or in the case of an international reading, perhaps a country, corporation, or individual leader or person overextends themselves. And realizing that they're either going to need to go off and get help, which would be the logical and most intelligent thing to do, or they're going to have a really tiring and exhausting job if they want to see this situation through to the end, this situation that they themselves started. I'm getting two very strong impressions about world leaders on this card, but the energy is not restricted to them. The first one is about our good friend Putin, who's shown up lots of times before, who, despite his age, still often acts like a cocky young tomcat, and sometimes is likely to overextend himself and feel the need to look for partnerships, or just get bogged down in the process of trying to hold what he's bitten off or taken care of, or attempted to take care of. However, I'm also feeling a very strong pull here towards the U.S. president for this coming month. I think this may be a direct result of some decisions and possibly the executive orders he's going to try to make on his own. In this show, I am neither supporting nor rejecting these moves. I try to stay out of that sort of thing on this broadcast. But the cards suggest that the energies are going to be there this month to push people, especially leaders such as the President of the United States or Vladimir Putin, to overextend themselves and struggle partly by making decisions based on passion, leaps of faith, or how they would like the world to be, rather than good judgment, level-headed thinking, and well thought out and good planning. I think this will also show up in other areas, with perhaps bankers, banks, and multinational corporations also taking these sorts of risks and jumps off of cliffs. If you're old enough to remember the debacle of New Coke many years ago, and if you're not, I'm sure there's stuff up on YouTube about this. Many years ago, Coca-Cola was going to be all new, and all the old Coke would go away, because you're going to so love the new Coke, nobody would want the old Coke. I'm getting a sort of image of this exact same sort of really unwise corporate decision, and I feel it's likely to come down the pike this month or very soon thereafter. It might not be quite as spectacular a fail as New Coke was when I had one roommate that bought like a year's worth of Coke and put it in the pantry, and there were people, collecting it and trying to sell it for $100 a 6-pack, that kind of stuff. I don't think it will be that bad, but it could be. And I expect there may be a quick reversal of the bad decision but it may also drag on for a while. Just like New Coke tried for a while to kind of slog it on for a bit, I get this feeling that this may slide on for a while before whatever it is admitted it's just not working. It's either defeated, or like New Coke, they have New Coke, but they go back to having old Coke. And for a while you have both of them, and now it's just, near as I can tell, Coke again. I don't drink Coke, so I haven't followed it that much, but it's that kind of thing. And I think it may be in the tech field. I'm not sure, but it feels like it might be computers or something like that. And I'm not sure exactly what, or possibly social media, but be looking for that, because that may be a flag that the energies are going that way. But finally, for this group of cards, getting away from, companies making mistakes, we get to that third card that I normally wouldn't have chosen. And this is where the puzzle pieces really fall into place with these three cards. The Ten of Swords is, I think, one of the most expressive cards in this deck. It was actually one of the cards that convinced me to buy it. But it's a very hard card for many people to look at, especially those that don't know cats very well. Because this card shows sacrifice, victimization, and martyrdom from a cat's viewpoint. The card shows a very dirty and disorganized human house, full of a number of badly kept and unhappy Siamese cats. Their litter box is overflowing and unclean. A worried mama cat, she's hiding in a cupboard with her babies, afraid of the big tomcat just outside the door, who's managing to miss the cat pan and make a bigger mess. There are two more cats that show just their tails as they turn away in disgust from everything going on. And there's one adventurous kind of younger cat that stands on the dirty dishes in the sink to look out through a broken window pane, and he's sort of looking at the sky and the fresh air like, I wonder if I jumped, if I could get out of here. This card is all about a cat's view of neglect, suffering, martyrdom, being a victim or feeling like one, feeling helpless and bottoming out. There's open cat food cans, but there's no food in them, or very little. The whole place is just really it's like a prison for the cats. So what we have here is the first card that projects a smug and lively cat in the first card in these three. This young cat who's prone to make unwise decisions based partly on feelings and also his immaturity. Followed by the same young cat feeling a bit overwhelmed and overtaken by actions or experience he jumped into himself and gets in over his head. Followed by a group of neglected, unhappy, and sort of martyred cats stuck in this mess. Perhaps not of their own creation exactly, but the cats then make it worse when they miss the litter pan or knock more dirty dishes to the floor. It's not always their fault, but it's this cascading sort of mess that they're in. I really don't like the sense of martyrdom this card projects either, both because of the situation in the Middle East, and to some degree Eastern Europe as well, where, quote, being a martyr, unquote, could take on the meaning of willing to die killing people, and it often does. but also because of this combination of the energies pushing people and groups of people first towards feeling like they could do anything and essentially that they could take on the world, which they then try to do, but not really based with any real good planning, just sort of on this wave of passion, and then they crash and burn. They crash and burn big time to the point of feeling themselves the victims themselves, and that's not good. Especially if the people who then feel like victims are in positions of power over others who they can blame for their own situation, or the opposite, if they already felt very much powerless and now they feel even more just totally victimized. Again, I feel a strong connection with the US president in this regard, but he is not the only one. Look for various world leaders, elites of all stripes, and even corporations and governments to decide that they are the real victims. If their choices did not work out, well, it must be someone else's fault. The people just don't understand us, for example. The public just isn't listening. I can hear this here in the local Irish water debate, which is sort of I look at it as kind of a microcosm of a lot of much bigger things going on elsewhere. You know, the government has now decided that they have done everything they can, so now it's just falls to the people. This is going to be a month for not just conflicts, but all those blame games too. Again, while this reading is international, it's going to play out in the lives of everyone to a degree, even on your individual level. Now, because you know this, you can try to direct your strong energies when you have them towards goals you can reach. Try to avoid taking on too much responsibility during this, what's already a really busy time period for most people. And since you probably are going to wind up doing that, whatever happens, if things start to fall apart, try not to fall in the depths of despair and fear or inaction, and don't try blaming other people, especially those who were not responsible. That's just going to make you really upset with them, and the focus is going to be on them rather than on the situation, which is what you really need to be taking charge of. I mean, everybody's going to feel a bit like a victim this month. That's just in the air. And some of us will have really good reasons for feeling that way. Sometimes, you know, if you're trapped in your house in the snow and you're running out of water and it's cold and, you know, you may really are trapped and you are kind of a victim in a way. I mean, you just can't have this much active energy and largely conflicting energy going on without some of that happening. But again, we are individuals and we do have choices. So even if you see some politician crying crocodile tears over their failed project that didn't pass and probably blaming the other political party, you know, or whatever, or you know, you're just, you really feel like, you know, your roommate burned dinner and you're just really furious because you were really hungry and you really wanted it right now. Remember, this is the energy of the month, to deflect things away from ourselves and try to project them onto other people. And if you can keep that in mind and just, again, try to keep things on an even keel, not make those hasty decisions, and take responsibility on yourself, you're much more likely to get things more to your liking. To the extent possible, though, limit your activities this holiday season. And if you get too far down the rabbit hole, make a conscious decision using wisdom and forethought when deciding what to drop and not what to continue on with. In other words, just don't go, I quit! Throw everything in the air and stomp off. That's probably not going to help either. But look, you know, I just really cannot agree to make the family dinner and decorate the tree and pick up everybody at the airport and do all the cleanup on my own. I just can't. I need help here. That would be a thought out decision as opposed to, I quit! Everybody go away! Because, you know, that's just not going to work either. There's a lot of unconscious wildness going on during this time period too. And the best way to deal with that sort of energy is, even if you're a person like myself, who's normally all gut and very little brain when it comes to a lot of decision making, again, you got to force yourself to sit down and think for 5 minutes before charging into the wilderness or telling your entire family to get lost, as I gave in the most recent example. If our leaders will do the same, if they'll take the same kind of self-judgment and self-awareness and time to think, this could potentially be a quieter month than I'm afraid it may be. but I'm not going to hold my breath on that one, given previous experience. Okay, so what are our last two main energies here? We've gone over the cards, but I've already mentioned the Berkano or birth rune. It's actually the final rune. Before it, though, we have Nadish. And Nadish is the need fire that people first learned to make by rubbing two sticks together. Even by the Viking Age, which was, about 1,000 years ago, people had found a lot easier ways of making fire than rubbing two sticks together. That was reserved only for the most desperate of situations. And desperation, need, and deliverance are all pretty much the meaning of this rune. Now I have a deck of rune cards from Holland with a lot of really nice artwork on them showing various meanings of the different runes. The picture card for now these is a tiny lifeboat full of sailors watching their ship sink and a giant wave come at them at the same time. Now their situation isn't totally hopeless, just like it isn't totally hopeless for the cats on the Ten of Swords, but in both cases there are a lot of things that need changing really fast for things to go forward in a positive way. Some of those things may involve individual choices, such as the kitty that's looking out the broken window and deciding if he can escape the house by jumping through it, or the mama cat who chooses to stay put and protect her kittens. Other things like the wave and the tiny boat come down to a combination of prayer and luck, because no human force is able to change the wave once it starts moving. On the other hand, careful preparation by human beings, and having things like a lifeboat in the first place, and a well-built one at that, will increase the sailor's chance of having a chance to survive here. Now these just like that. It's about desperation, but it's also about being desperate enough to pick up two sticks and do something about the situation as far as you can do so. The light that results may be smoking and small, but it's better than nothing, and it's still likely to keep the predators at bay. I also have to mention that some people associate this rune with, of all things, nuclear stuff, because of the rubbing of the two sticks together that creates sort of a cosmic fire. It's like, the atoms rubbing back and forth. I'm not necessarily feeling that here, but it niggles a bit. So look for news stories about nuclear power, energy, weapons, or even things like some new information leaking out about Fukushima, or perhaps other nuclear accidents, either actual ones or potential ones, some warnings coming into the news. I'm just getting the sense that there's going to be some stories about that. Finally, we had the Berkano rune or birth moon that I mentioned before. This rune is complex. Like the libido card, it's about human fertility, but it also looks like it's the letter B in English and or Latin letters, and it's associated with breasts of the mother goddess, the birch tree, and even the idea of Mother Earth herself. This rune tends to signal the start of a new situation or cycle. Coming at the end of the reading, well, actually I pulled both runes at the same time, so we really have need and birth together, but I decided to read it as the last rune because it fits well here. We have the start of a new cycle or situation coming towards the end of this time period. On a practical level, I think there's also likely to be stories or information about birth, birthing, the earth, possibly even some earth changes or type of activity. Volcanoes are always likely when you have that sort of Nadish-Berkano combination, as well as some earthquakes, especially in either case new or unexpected ones. Or if it's something like an ongoing eruption, there may be a change or something. So I pay attention to things like the volcano in Hawaii, Bardabunga in Iceland, or even the volcanoes that we don't normally expect to go off, like maybe Etna. I'm not saying they will go off, but if I lived at Mount Shasta, at the foot of Mount Shasta right now, I'd be keeping my eye on it. I also feel a strong weather connection both in Nadish and Berkano, and this may be the birth of desperate weather cycles, ones that leave people crying out for need fire, literally, and the skills required to rub two sticks together to stay warm. There may be energy and fuel shortages also in places, serious enough to cause people to take really desperate measures, like burning their furniture, or leaving their homes and try to walk for heat shelters during these periods. The energy is also likely to cause international reactions of various sorts, with desperation leading to the birth of new decisions, directions, and even technologies. Now, some of these are going to be a really good thing. Again, not everything is negative. Then maybe this whole situation may give a kick in the pants to get some technologies off the shelf and into the hands of the public, or into some really enterprising corporations, some of the good ones that are trying to be the good guys, because, and this could be a very good thing if desperation and need actually bring forth good results and things that are helpful. Remember, the Norse god Loki, it's always seen as being getting into trouble, and people think of him as bad news, but at the end of almost every story, he produces something good and useful for mankind. So it's, we can look at this from that way as well. Now, new directions and these ideas are not a bad thing, but again, if they're not based on a sound foundation, they could get into trouble during this time period. In other words, that might be a great idea to have a flying car and fly out of here, but we need to have all the other pieces that line up in a row before we can get there. However, the Berkano rune is the last part of this reading, and also suggests the new year is likely to bring a new cycle of energy changes, which we can only hope is a good thing here. It is too early to tell if the coming January energy is likely to be more active or more passive, but we can hope that it's a bit less conflicted and a little less superficial. The holiday distractions will have lifted, and the realities, both good and not so good, will really come home for people, I think, after December. I'll take a good look towards the end of December and early January, and hopefully do a reading for the year 2015 as well. So, but we're going to have to look at January later, because I really feel like it's a new cycle, and we want to see what direction that's going. But the close of 2014 really does look like, this kind of energy tipping window when we lead into something else. So hopefully things will get clearer closer to New Year's Day, and we'll be able to see what direction they're going to go galloping off into. Meanwhile, as always, remember you have choices. Even if those around you are quick to engage in conflicts, acting superficial, overextended, and determined to be the victims, we don't have to go that route ourselves. Every single card and rune has positive as well as negative aspects. I'm not just feeling positive about the international current events fallout from these energies at the moment, but as individuals, you can use all that energy and drive, that sense of accomplishment, the delight of the life forces, and even the positive aspects of personal protection that's in that warrior card to make your personal life a rather more exciting and vibrant place over the holidays. Even if you get somewhat trapped by circumstances or are forced to take on jobs you don't like very much, you can make that conscious decision to avoid the victim mentality and instead pick up your sticks and light a much needed fire. This will help you give birth to the good and positive aspects that are held in the depths of all of these cards, making a good holiday season for you and your family. It can also help you to watch the sideshow of current events with a little more perspective, kind of in the background, and you'll have a little bit of distance too, which I think we're all going to want to have during this time period. Think of it like watching the movie, because there's just going to be a lot of energy pressure out there for people to simply act out, react, or despair, probably in that order. And just being aware that this pattern's there can help keep you free of it to direct your own actions, rather than simply riding it like a wave, like a big surfboard here. In any case, though, at this point, I want to wish all my listeners an absolutely wonderful holiday season and a very happy new year. I hope to have at least 2 or 3 shows during the month of December, but I, like everybody else, I'm going to be very busy, so we'll just have to see how that goes. I am hoping to have a couple more really interesting interviews coming up pretty soon here, but catching up with people during this month is also kind of problematic, so some of those may actually spin into January and February, but we are working on it. Meanwhile, I want everybody to take care again, and hopefully next week we'll be back with another Cat's Eye on the Future. See you then. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.